We had 17 words for surrender in our language. 17.
Carved into treaty stone, whispered at funeral pyres, taught to children before they learned to write their own names.
Surrender was not weakness in our culture, it was arithmetic.
A clean calculation. You counted the variables, weighed the odds, and, when the numbers said stop, you stopped.
We assumed everyone did this. We were wrong about one species. Not because they were stronger.
Not because their ships were faster or their weapons more elegant or their biology more resistant to the cold between stars. We were wrong because they had 0 words for surrender.
Not one.
We searched. Our linguists spent months inside their oldest texts, their wars, their religions, the small private diaries of men and women who had every reason to stop and chose not to.
0. The closest word they had was retreat, and, even that, even in their own usage, they used it as a synonym for not yet.
I am Tactical Observer 3rd Rank Venusaries of the Collective Advance Fleet. I have logged 41 engagements across 6 contested sectors. I have watched species rise and fold and negotiate themselves into comfortable irrelevance. I am writing this report because Command needs to understand what happened at Grid Sector 7 Damaris.
I am writing it also because I cannot sleep. And, because the one human, the single one we had in our records when this began apparently told a joke while doing what I am about to describe. A joke. This is a 3-part account. Everything in it is true.
I have timestamped every entry, because I need anyone to believe me.
Timestamp, 1 second, recording begins.
The thing nobody tells you about war is how much of it is waiting. I had been awake for 22 hours by the time the first sensor ping came through, and I was doing what I always do when I'm anxious, counting rivets on the observation deck ceiling.
244 of them. I'd counted them before.
The number never changes, but I count anyway, because the act of counting is the only thing that makes my secondary heart rate normalize.
244 rivets.
The ping came back wrong.
Not wrong as in malfunction.
Wrong as in the return signature didn't match anything in our threat index.
1 contact. Moving slow.
Too slow for military.
Too irregular for cargo.
The pattern was almost biological, which made no sense because no organic being survives raw vacuum, and we were well outside the atmosphere belt of the nearest station. Sensor Officer Trenboss swiveled in her harness and looked at me with an expression I will describe as professionally uncomfortable.
3rd rank, she said. You should come see this. I came and saw it. 1 human.
In what I can only describe as a suit held together by materials our database couldn't fully classify, polymer composites, metal alloy patches, something that read as vulcanized rubber, which is an ancient Earth waterproofing material that has no business being in deep space, crawling along the outer hull of our lead frigate.
Crawling. Not floating. Not propelling.
Crawling, like gravity, was a personal choice and they'd simply opted out of participating.
Is it hostile? Trenvoss asked.
I watched the figure move another 3 meters along the hull.
Patient. Methodical.
Pausing every few body lengths to press something flat against the surface, a tool, maybe, or a sensor of their own, and then continuing.
I don't know what it is, I said. Timestamp, 4 hours 19 minutes and 1 second, I made the first of what would become many log entries I later labeled I should have acted differently here. For context, because Command will want context, we had been pursuing what remained of the 14th Human Provisional Forces for 11 days. The 14th was not a famous unit. They were not elite. They were, by every metric our intelligence had compiled, an undermanned, under-equipped salvage and support company that had been in the wrong corridor of space when our advance pushed through the Damaris relay stations. They should have evacuated. They didn't.
They stayed and fought a 3-day rearguard action that our tactical analysts still describe as statistically incoherent.
Not impressive. Incoherent.
Because the decisions they made, the positions they held, the resources they burned, the ground they refused to cede did not correspond to any recognizable military logic. At one point, they held a corridor for 6 hours with 4 personnel and a mining drill repurposed as a directional charge.
A mining drill.
We lost 9 soldiers to a mining drill operated by people who, based on our scans, had not slept in roughly 40 hours. Our field commander at the time, High Conductor Ashvareth, reviewed the engagement logs and said, and I am quoting from the official record, they are fighting as though they expect to win. She meant it as a criticism of their tactical judgment. I think, in retrospect, she was more right than she understood.
Back to the hull crawler. We did what doctrine says, we hailed them.
Standard contact protocol, 7 frequencies, 3 languages, a universal mathematical greeting sequence that roughly translates to "we know you're there, please indicate intent."
The human paused. Pressed their flat tool to the hull. Continued crawling. They're ignoring us, Trenvas said. I can see that. Should we don't shoot it?
I wasn't going to say whatever you were going to say, I said, the answer is not yet. Timestamp, 4 hours 31 minutes and 17 seconds, note to self, not yet is apparently also a human concept.
I did not know this when I said it. We tracked them for another 20 minutes.
The figure moved with the kind of unhurried focus that made me think of deep maintenance engineers, the ones who go outside during long transit and spend 12 hours doing the kind of structural checking that automated systems miss. Except this was our hull they were on, not theirs. And nothing about their trajectory made sense as reconnaissance. They weren't mapping anything I could identify, they weren't placing charges along any structural weak point we'd have considered worth defending.
They stopped near Junction Panel 7G. I know Junction Panel 7G. 244 rivets. I'd memorized the schematics during the transit out here because I couldn't sleep and I needed something to count. Junction Panel 7G houses the secondary coolant relay for our forward sensor array. The human reached into whatever they were carrying, a pack, patched and repatched and seemingly held to their suit with a combination of clips and, I am not joking, physical rope, and produced a tool. Third rank, Trenvas said. I see it. They're going to, I see it. The human worked for about 3 minutes. Precise. No wasted motion.
The kind of efficiency that doesn't come from training manuals, it comes from having done a thing so many times that your body stops asking your brain for permission. Then, they replaced the panel cover.
Moved on. Junction Panel 7G, intact. Untouched, as far as our internal sensors could confirm. What did they just do? Trenvas asked. I didn't have an answer. The human kept moving.
Timestamp, 5 hours 2 minutes and 44 seconds. I need to explain something about how I think, because it matters for what happened next. I am, by nature, a pattern recognition specialist.
That is not modesty, it is literally my function. Tactical observers don't fight.
We watch, we log, we find the shape inside the chaos and hand that shape to people who make decisions.
I'm good at it.
I made 3rd rank in 14 cycles because I am very, very good at finding patterns.
I could not find the pattern in this human. That has not happened to me before.
The figure had now made contact with 4 hull panels, appeared to do something at each one, and moved on without triggering a single internal alarm. Either what they were doing was too subtle for our sensors, which implied a level of operational knowledge about our specific ship class that should have been impossible, or what they were doing wasn't sabotage at all. Which left a question I didn't want to ask, because the answer options were all worse than sabotage.
I asked it anyway. What else could they be doing out there? Trenvas thought about it. Hiding? From what?
Their own fleet retreated 6 days ago.
Surviving? I looked at the sensor display.
The human had now been on our hull for 47 minutes. In a suit of polymer patchwork and vulcanized rubber and whatever else they'd stitched together. The surface temperature of our outer hull and shadow ran cold enough to cause problems even for species that tolerate cold well. Humans, per our biological index, do not tolerate cold well. The human moved to panel 7M, worked.
Replaced. Moved. Get me everything we have on the 14th Provisional Forces, I said. Trenvas pulled the files. I skimmed them fast. 41 personnel, original manifest.
41 was already barely a company. By the time we'd pushed through Damaris, our engagement log showed I cross-referenced 3 times, because the number seemed wrong.
11 personnel remaining, last confirmed position, the secondary relay station we'd seized 9 days ago. I looked at the hull display. 1 human. On our hull. After 9 days. Trenvas, I said. How far is the secondary relay station from our current position? She checked. At suit propulsion? She paused. 8 days. Maybe 7 at maximum burn. I did the arithmetic. It didn't close. No suit propulsion brings a human from the relay station to our hull in 9 days. Not physically. Not with consumables. The math just didn't work. The numbers said what this human was doing was not possible. I have said this before. The numbers said a lot of things about this particular species that didn't turn out to be useful. Timestamp, 5 hours 44 minutes and 11 seconds, the human stopped moving. Not stopped as in paused. Stopped as in settled. Found a recessed equipment bay on the dorsal surface, the kind of shallow depression designed for emergency tether point access, and simply sat down in it. Tucked themselves against the hull. Oriented toward the stars. Trenvas and I stared at the sensor feed for a full minute without speaking. Are they resting? She finally said. The figure didn't move. 3rd rank. Are they sleeping? I watched the biometric returns our sensors could pull imprecise through that suit, but enough to track cardiac rhythm, respiratory cycle. Slow. Regular. Yes. The human was sleeping. On our hull. In a patched suit. In the cold. After whatever they had been doing for the past hour and a half. I sat back in my harness and looked at the ceiling and counted rivets for a while, because my secondary heart rate was doing something alarming. 244. Don't wake them, I said. What? Don't. Wake. Them. I pulled the sensor log and started marking timestamps. I want continuous biometric capture. I want a record of every panel they touched. And I stopped, because what I wanted to say next felt professionally embarrassing. 3rd rank? I want to know what they're planning, I said. Before they do it. Trenvas looked at me like I'd suggested counting the stars. I understood her skepticism. I had been watching this human for 91 minutes. They had done something I didn't understand to 6 hull panels, crossed approximately 8 days of vacuum on a suit held together with rope and optimism, and were now sleeping on the outside of an enemy warship with the energy expenditure of someone waiting for a transit pod. I had the profound, deeply inconvenient feeling that I was the one who didn't understand the situation. Not them. Timestamp, 6 hours and 1 minute, end of first log cycle. Note, I need to find better coffee. The commissary blend tastes like thermal paste and I have been drinking it anyway for 6 days because comfort is comfort. I am aware this is not a professional observation. I am logging it anyway. The human slept for 4 hours and 17 minutes. Then, they got up, checked something on their wrist display, and kept moving. I didn't sleep at all. Continue, Part 2. What we thought we were watching. By mid-cycle, we had a name. Sergeant First Class Mara Voss. Human female, age 31 by their calendar. 14 years of service, which, for a species with their lifespan, is longer than it sounds. Assigned to the 14th Provisional Forces Engineering and Demolition Section approximately 8 months before our push through Damaris. Engineering and Demolitions. I looked at that line in her file for a while. Then, I looked at the list of hull panels she'd visited. Then, I went back to the file, because I wanted to check something. Demolitions personnel in the collective receive extensive education in what we call structural negation, the identification of load-bearing elements, stress points, cascade failure architectures. The places where a system is most vulnerable. We spend years teaching our engineers which panels to avoid in combat. I wondered what they taught the humans. Timestamp, 10 hours 41 minutes and 17 seconds, cross-referencing hull panel designations against structural schematics. Note, I am doing this because I am thorough. Not because I am afraid. I am logging the distinction for my own peace of mind. Here is what we knew by hour 14, Voss had now visited 19 hull panels.
She'd spent between 90 seconds and 4 minutes at each one. Our internal sensors confirmed no breaches, no implanted devices, no chemical traces.
Whatever she was doing at those panels, it wasn't the thing demolitions personnel are supposed to do.
High Conductor Ashvereth, when I briefed her at the start of the secondary cycle, listened to my summary with the expression of someone who has been handed a math problem by a student who claims the answer is blue.
She's been on our hull for 14 hours, Ashvereth said. Yes, Conductor. Doing nothing. Doing something. We don't know what.
But nothing that has harmed the ship.
I hesitated. Not that we can confirm. Ashvereth looked at me the way superior officers look at subordinates who are being technically correct in an annoying way. Observer Venisores. What is your assessment? This was the moment I should have said something confident and dismissive.
That is what a third-rank tactical observer is supposed to do: project certainty, frame the variable, reduce the unknown to a manageable category.
I said, I genuinely don't know what she's doing, Conductor. And I think that matters more than anything else I could tell you. A silence.
Continue monitoring, Ashvereth said.
Yes, Conductor. And get some rest, Venisores. You look like something went through the recycler. Timestamp, 10 hours 58 minutes and 3 seconds, I did not get rest. Voss took another break at hour 16.
Not sleep this time, she found a different equipment recess, brighter side, angled toward the system star, and she just stopped.
Helmet tilted up. Toward the light. Voss watched the biometrics. Cardiac elevation. Respiratory steady.
I think she might be, she paused.
Is she enjoying herself? I had no professional framework for answering that. The sensor return showed Voss holding still for 11 minutes.
Then, she reached into her patchwork pack and produced something small, metallic, and spent about 4 minutes doing something with her hands that our visual sensors couldn't resolve at this range.
What is that? Voss said. I'm magnified. I think it's food. She brought food. She brought food. We both absorbed that.
There is a particular kind of unsettling feeling that comes not from encountering something dangerous, but from encountering something you can't map.
Voss eating a meal on the hull of an enemy warship while apparently enjoying the view of a star was not threatening. It was not hostile.
It was so casually, mundanely normal, translated into a context so profoundly abnormal, that it produced in me something I can only describe as a mild, persistent vertigo.
She was not panicking.
She was not performing courage.
There was no one to perform for.
She was just there. Doing what needed doing, resting when she needed rest, eating when she needed food, and continuing when she was ready.
It was the most alien behavior I had ever observed. And she was the human. Timestamp, 17 hours 22 minutes and 9 seconds, panel count, 31. Pattern still unresolved.
I've started a secondary notation log specifically for things I expect to regret not understanding.
The answer came from a direction I didn't expect. Not from watching Voss. From an intercept.
Our signals team, 2 decks down, perpetually undervalued, perpetually correct at the worst possible moments, flagged an encrypted tight beam communication at hour 19. Narrow band, short burst, originating from a point approximately 200 kilometers off our port stern.
It was gone before we could get a full capture.
What we did pull, after 40 minutes of decryption work, was a fragment.
11 words.
11 words in the human military shorthand that our translation bank covered only partially, but 11 words was enough, holding.
19 of 23.
Confirm when ready.
We, and then, nothing. I read it 3 times. 19 of 23. 19 of 23 what?
Timestamp, 18 hours 1 minute and 44 seconds. I am now looking at Voss's panel map with different eyes.
I do not like what I am seeing.
I am logging this before I bring it to the conductor because I want a record that I figured it out, even if I figured it out late. It took me 42 minutes of schematic cross-referencing and a lot of cold thermal paste coffee to understand what Mara Voss had been doing on our hull for 19 hours.
She wasn't sabotaging our systems. She was learning them.
Not in the reconnaissance sense. She wasn't mapping our capabilities for a future engagement, wasn't photographing sensor placements or weapon emplacements. She was learning them the way an engineer learns a machine they're going to have to operate under pressure without a manual. Every panel she touched housed either a bypass junction, a manual override, or an emergency access point for a critical ship system.
Not the weapons. Not the engines.
The life support architecture.
Pressure management. Atmosphere recycling. Thermal regulation. Emergency bulkhead release. All the systems that, in an emergency, could be operated from outside the hull. If you knew where to look. If you knew exactly what you were doing.
If you'd spent 14 years learning how to find the bones of a machine and understand them by feel.
19 of 23 contact points covered. 4 left. I ran to the bridge.
Ashvereth listened to me with the expression of someone who was about to have a very bad day and has already begun the grieving process.
She's not alone, I said. The signal, 19 of 23, she's coordinating. There are others. Survivors of the 14th. Some of them. I don't know how many.
I don't know where they are. The signal was too brief for triangulation.
But she's not the only one out there.
Ashvereth's jaw did the thing it does when she's calculating force options. If she's learning our override architecture, she can teach it. Or they already know it and she's confirming the specific variants on this ship class.
To what end?
And here is where I had to say the thing that sounded delusional.
Conductor, I said carefully, I think they're planning to take the ship.
The silence on the bridge was the specific kind that happens when a statement is too absurd to dismiss and too coherent to laugh at.
There are 11 of them, Ashvereth said. At most. Against a complement of 400. Yes. On the hull of an enemy warship. Yes. In patched suits. Yes. Another silence. That's, Ashvereth started. Stopped. Started again. Venusaurs, that is insane. I know. No military doctrine in the collective in any fleet we have records of. I know. 11 personnel cannot take a ship of this class.
The mathematics, conductor. I stopped her, because I needed to say the next part clearly.
I've been watching this human for 19 hours.
She slept on our hull for 4 hours and ate a meal while watching the stars. She is not operating inside the mathematics. She is operating inside something else, and I don't know what to call it yet, but I think we should act as if she can do exactly what I said.
Ashvereth looked at me for a long moment. Seal all manual override access points, she said. Yes, conductor.
Internal security alert, quiet, I don't want panic.
And, bring her inside. I blinked. Inside?
If she's been on our hull for 19 hours and hasn't triggered a single alarm, she is more useful to us as a captured intelligence source than as an unknown variable on our exterior. Bring her in through the closest airlock.
Carefully. Ashvereth's expression did something complicated. Carefully, Venusaurs. Yes. Conductor.
I was halfway to the door when she spoke again.
Venusaurs. I turned. The rest of them, she said. The other 10. Where would they be? I had been thinking about this since the intercept. It was the part that kept pulling at me. Because Voss had been on our hull. Visible, if you knew where to look.
Monitoring her biometrics, her movement, her toolkit, we'd built a detailed picture of one individual.
But she'd been on our hull for 19 hours. And we'd only started looking for her at hour 0. The others had had 19 hours too. Doing what?
Where?
19 of 23, the signal had said. I had been focused on Voss's 23 contact points.
I hadn't considered whether there were other sets of 23 somewhere.
Inside the ship. Timestamp, 18 hours 44 minutes and 1 second. I think we have been watching the wrong human. We sent a retrieval team to the airlock nearest Voss's last confirmed position. She was already gone. Not gone as in moved on. Not gone as in retreated.
Gone as in the equipment bay she'd been occupying for the last 40 minutes was empty. Her biometric signature, which Trent Voss had been maintaining continuous track on, had simply stopped.
Not terminated. Stopped.
Like whatever she was wearing had gone cold, gone dark, shielded itself from our sensors in the span of minutes.
She knew, Trent Voss said. Quiet. A little pale. She knew we made her. How?
That was the question that kept me up for the rest of the cycle, even after everything else started moving, even after the alarms began.
How did she know? We hadn't changed our behavior. Hadn't increased scan frequency.
Hadn't altered our approach vector or done anything that should have read as we understand what you're doing now.
Unless the 19-panel signal hadn't been an update to distant allies. Unless it had been sent to us. Knowing we'd intercept it. Knowing we'd spend 40 minutes decrypting it.
Knowing we'd run exactly the analysis I'd run and reach exactly the conclusion I'd reached and run exactly to the bridge and trigger exactly the response Ashvareth had triggered.
19 of 23. Enough to tell us she was learning the overrides.
Enough to make us seal them, pull attention to the hull, focus every security measure outward.
Not an update. A distraction. The alarms started 11 minutes later. From inside the ship. Timestamp, 19 hours 1 minute and 22 seconds. I am logging this while running. I have spilled the last of my coffee. I am not going back for it. I cannot believe I am not going back for it. This is what they do to you.
Continue, Part 3, the joke, internal alarms active on decks 3, 5, and 7. Security teams mobilized.
I am on deck 4. I am unclear on whether this is the correct deck to be on.
Here is what I knew by the time I reached the internal security hub, breathing hard and very much regretting the layout of this ship's access corridors. 11 humans. 11 surviving members of the 14th Provisional Forces, who had by every reasonable projection been scattered, degraded, and, retreating toward whatever passed for a safe harbor in this sector, had instead spent 9 days doing something else entirely. What they had spent 9 days doing, I was only now beginning to understand in full. They had not been retreating. They had been approaching.
Slow. Patient.
From multiple vectors, using the debris field the retreat itself had created our own spent ordnance, the wreckage of 2 stations, a logistics drone cluster we disabled and left drifting as cover, as camouflage, as a road.
9 days. In patched suits. Eating whatever they'd had.
Sleeping in shifts on the hulls of things that weren't trying to kill them, resting against wreckage in the dark between stars, moving when they could and holding still when they couldn't. 9 days of doing the math that said this was impossible and continuing anyway. The alarms on Deck 3 were atmospheric, a pressure fluctuation, small enough to be a seal degradation, the kind of thing that triggers an automated response and dispatches a maintenance team without escalating to full security. The alarms on Deck 5 were a power conduit fault.
Again, small. Automated. Maintenance. The alarms on Deck 7 were a coolant leak in a non-critical system. 3 separate systems. 3 separate teams dispatched. Each one moving away from the others, because the ship is large and the faults were distributed, and our security doctrine, sensibly, logically, in accordance with every engagement scenario in the tactical manual, prioritizes isolating faults rather than concentrating forces. They had read our tactical manual. Or they had guessed it. Or they had fought against us long enough to understand how we respond to emergencies, what pulls our attention, or we send people when 3 things go wrong at once. The bridge had none of this information yet when I arrived at the security hub.
The bridge was coordinating 3 maintenance dispatches and 1 hull retrieval team, juggling them with the competent efficiency of a crew that had done this kind of crisis management before. I looked at the fault map and felt a very cold, very specific thing settle into the base of my secondary chest cavity.
Deck 3. Deck 5. Deck 7.
The maintenance teams would pass through 6 junctions to reach their respective fault sites.
All 6 of those junctions connected to the same interior corridor. Not the same deck. Not the same system. The same corridor.
A corridor that ran the length of the ship's interior spine and provided access to, among other things, the emergency helm override stations, the manual control points that exist on every collective warship for exactly the scenario where bridge access is lost. The places you'd need to go if you wanted to take a ship without going through the bridge.
Timestamp, 19 hours 14 minutes and 22 seconds, I am calling the bridge. I am being put on hold. There is apparently a hold queue during an active emergency. I did not know we had a hold queue. I am making a note to raise this in the post-engagement review, assuming there is a post-engagement review, assuming I am present for it.
I reached Ashvareth on the secondary line, which bypasses the queue, which I should have remembered existed.
Conductor, I said. The faults are decoys. A half second. Explain. I explained. Faster than I'd ever explained anything, because explanations have a shelf life and this one was expiring. Another half second. Pull the maintenance teams, Ashvareth said. Yes, conductor. And seal the spine corridor. All access points. Yes, conductor. Now, Venusaurs. I was already moving. I sealed 4 of the 6 spine corridor access points before my authorization level hit a wall. 2 of them required command rank credentials. I got Ashvareth's authorization forwarded in approximately 40 seconds. I spent those 40 seconds standing in front of an access panel counting rivets. This panel had 6, which is not enough rivets. Someone made a poor decision when they installed this panel, and, trying not to think about what 11 humans with 19 hours of interior access preparation could accomplish in 40 seconds. The authorization came through. I sealed the 5th point. The 6th point, the one at the far end of the corridor, the one closest to the emergency helm override cluster, was already open. Not forced. Not bypassed. Open, as in someone with correct access credentials had authorized it from the inside. I stared at the panel. The 14th Provisional Forces were a salvage and support company. Salvage and support personnel, in the course of their work, regularly interface with disabled and captured vessels, including, per our own engagement records, 2 collective ships that the 14th had been assigned to tow during the early phase of the Damaris operation. 2 of our ships. Boarded and worked on by human salvage technicians under Provisional Forces supervision. Under supervision. Our supervision. While we watched to make sure they didn't steal anything valuable. While we did not watch to see if they memorized the credential architecture. Timestamp, 19 hours 19 minutes and 8 seconds, I am logging the specific flavor of this feeling for the record. It is the flavor of understanding that the thing you have been watching was never the thing that mattered. I will not describe the next 22 minutes in real time because I was not in a position to observe most of it directly. I was in a maintenance corridor on Deck 4, coordinating sensor feeds and relaying to Ashvareth and largely being a very anxious set of eyes for people who were doing things. What I can tell you is this: the 11 humans had been inside the ship for somewhere between 4 and 6 hours before we identified them. Not as stowaways, as maintenance staff. Wearing environment suits that had, apparently, been modified to mask human biometric signatures as collective physiological norms. Imperfectly. Our sensors would have caught the variance eventually. But, eventually is a lot of time when you're moving through a ship you've spent 9 days preparing to move through. They had taken no offensive action in those 4 to 6 hours. They had positioned themselves at the emergency helm override stations, at the atmospheric control junctions, at the power distribution nodes, at the places you'd need to be if you wanted, with 11 people, to make a ship of 400 do what you needed it to do. Not through violence. Through architecture.
11 people in the right places, with fingers on the right switches, can make a ship ungovernable.
Not captured, ungovernable. Every system an argument. Every function a negotiation.
The crew can push back, can override the overrides, but every push takes time, and time is the thing 11 people with nothing left to lose are spending freely. Ashvereth later told me that what followed was the most frustrating 50 minutes of her 30-year career.
Not dangerous. Frustrating.
Because every time security moved to extract one of them, 2 other systems went sideways. Because their coordination was seamless, no communication we could intercept, which meant they'd planned it down to the contingency, built the whole sequence from the beginning, trusted each other to hold their pieces without being told.
Because none of them broke. Not one.
Not when we isolated 3 of them on Deck 7 and cut their air supply to a quarter capacity for 8 minutes, which is the kind of thing doctrine says produces rapid compliance.
They held their positions for 8 minutes and breathed shallow and did not move. 8 minutes. I watched the biometrics. Elevated cardiac, suppressed respiratory, the specific signature of conscious physical management under duress.
They were scared. They were absolutely, genuinely scared, all 3 of them, cardiac through the ceiling, and they held. Timestamp, 20 hours 41 minutes and 9 seconds, conditional negotiation initiated.
I am watching this from the security hub on Deck 4. I have found a cold unit of thermal paste coffee from earlier in the cycle. I am drinking it because I don't know what else to do with my hands. The negotiation lasted 11 minutes.
Ashvereth gave them passage out of the ship, clear corridor to the nearest station, non-pursuit for 48 hours.
This is not nothing. 48 hours in a patched suit across the distance is still a math problem that probably doesn't close. But it's a chance.
She gave them a chance because the alternative, extracting 11 people from distributed system critical positions while maintaining ship function, was a calculation with more downside than upside.
They took the deal. All 11 of them, sequenced out through the port airlock in pairs, back into the dark and the cold and the impossible arithmetic of their survival. Last one out was Voss.
I know this because I was watching the airlock feed by then.
I'd moved up a deck.
She paused in the lock. Just for a second, the kind of pause that isn't hesitation, it's the pause of someone doing a final check, making sure everyone else is clear, accounting for all the variables one more time. Then, she turned, partially, toward the interior camera.
She knew it was there. Of course she did, she'd spent 19 hours learning where everything was. She said something. One sentence.
Our audio capture from the lock is imperfect, but our translation bank is good, and what it rendered, what I've read 17 times now, because I keep returning to it, because I cannot decide if it's the most arrogant thing I've ever heard or the most honest, what Maravas said, in the airlock of a ship she just made ungovernable for 51 minutes with 10 other people using nothing but preparation and stubbornness and the kind of trust that doesn't have a word in 17 languages. Better luck next time. We almost ran out of coffee. Then, she was gone. Timestamp, 21 hours 3 minutes and 17 seconds, end of engagement. Hull secure. All systems nominal. 14th Provisional Forces, status, at large. I filed my report. All of it, the hull observation, the misidentification of Voss as the primary threat, the credential architecture oversight, the maintenance team decoy sequence. Everything I got wrong and everything I got right, and the precise moment I understood which was which. Ashvereth reviewed it without calling me in. She said one line back, accurate. Don't let this one go. I don't intend to. Here is what I've been thinking about since, in the hours between the end of the engagement and the writing of this closing entry, we had 17 words for surrender. We gave it to children. We built it into doctrine as the logical terminus of an impossible situation, the place the math takes you when you've run out of options. The 14th Provisional Forces had no options. They had 11 people, patched suits, salvaged credentials, and 9 days. They had a plan built entirely on the premise that they were going to do something no one would believe they were doing, because it was insane, because it was impossible, because the math said no. They ran the math. Came up with not yet. And then,
they packed their food. I don't have a clean thought to close this with.
I've been trying to find one for 3 hours and every version I write sounds either too frightened or too admiring, and neither of those is the accurate register. What is accurate is this: I have been a tactical observer for 14 cycles. I am third rank because I find patterns.
I am good at this.
I found no pattern in Mara Vas.
And, the thing that keeps me awake, the thing I cannot answer, that I will be unable to answer until I encounter another one of them and, watch more carefully, is whether that's because humans don't have patterns. Or because their patterns operate at a scale that makes ours look like rivets. 244 of them. I've started to wonder if that number is enough. Timestamp, 1 second, recording ends.
Observer Venusaures, 3rd rank, Collective Advance Fleet.
Recommending immediate upgrade of threat classification for all 14th Provisional Forces personnel.
Recommending also a review of our credential architecture, our maintenance response protocols, and, I am aware this last one will not be actioned, our assumption that 11 is a small number.